So we have like, yeah, this random thing in the world called foo. What is it? Who cares? It's foo. But when it comes to CRUD API, like CRUD actions and HTTP, we're going to see a familiar like convention for like combining these things. So we're going to like see a get request to foos, and that would return foos. I could do a get request to foos and then pass it the ID. That should return one food. And let's say food has a couple parameters. It has BAS and BAM. There's two attributes on foods. If I do a post to foods, and send it an object of like BAS, say BAS and BAM, that's going to create food. Do a put to foods that updates. I'm missing something. What do you think I need? If I do a put, like here's the method, here's the URL. So let's also say this is the method. That is the URL. What it does. If I'm on the, so this is like, you can think the client, I'm doing a put request, right? I need to give this an ID. So you're going to see that puts foo ID, that should update food. Also would need to pass it some attributes so it actually knows what to update. And I can do a delete. That deletes. So you might see URLs like kind of like this, where it's like the thing, and then think about all the things where it's specifically dealing with one of those things. So like a showing one foo, updating a foo, or deleting a foo. Those all need IDs because it's dealing with one thing. So that's why we have this colon ID. What is the ID? I just need to actually, when I call it, I need to give it an actual ID that's in my database. Now, we prepended our URL with API. That's sometimes something you might see. We don't have to do this, but it's sometimes a nice convention because lets us know this is an API. So this is the menu like that we're going to be using a whole bunch, and this is going to be repetitive. So let's say it's no longer foo, it's food. Okay, so now it's food. This is not BAS and BAM. This is, what does a food have? It has a name and a price. Okay, so what is this? That's foods, 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 foods. And don't pass that BAS and BAM, pass that name and price. What does that do? That returns all food. That returns one food. That creates a food to the database. That updates food. That deletes a food.
And that name and price have to match what's on the database, right?
Yeah,
Like if it's named name, we're not just like called food.
yeah. And let's say we have a car model. So let's say we have a car. The car might have a make and model. And the other thing we're gonna like think about here is what type of data. Like, oh, this should probably be a string. This should be a string. That's like, okay, well, when we're gonna create this, I'm expecting this to be a string and a string. You could have a price. There's going to be different data types with, because now we're working with it's PostgreSQL data types, and like they do have, it's not like JavaScript where they just have a number type. They have like a float type. They have an integer type. They actually have like a small int. Like they have all sorts of different types of data. But for now, let's anyone know the difference between a float and a integer? Because those are the common ones we'll see.
An integer is a rounded number, right? And a float can.
Yeah, a float has a decimal.
Yeah.
So 1.0 is a float, 1 is a integer. So yeah, if this is a car, this would be API cars. That returns all cars. This is API cars, then give me the ID of the car, that returns one car. API cars, if we do a post request to API cars, give it the, well, now we need to give it the make model price that creates a car to the database. Do an API cars ID, once again, give it the make model price. See, this can become very standard. I mean, I can come in like, so these are like very like the standard CRUD URLs that you'll see. But I could definitely do like, hey, do a get request to, I can come in here and do whatever. Like we can do like more custom. But for now, we're kind of not going to get into that. We're going to kind of just stick with these traditional methods. So if I were to actually, go code this in React, that's an like I want to get all cars, that's an axios.get. The URL API/cars. That is the request to get all cars. If I wanted to create a car, I'm going to do an axios.post, give it the URL /API/cars. And then, let's give it an object. That goes in and creates a car. And, when we do it like, that's why we do like the let res. I call that variable res because it's the response. I could call it response, call it T, but I think the most common is either res or response. And we wait for that because that's like a asynchronous call. It takes some time. And if it's foos, if it's just any random thing, it's just going to be, and we want to post something, we do foos. If we want to get something, a URL API foos, a get request. So this is kind of like our something, and yeah, we're going to be following this. We might get into some custom routes, but this kind of convention, we'll see this a lot. We'll later see like associations, because if we're thinking about something like cars, cars might have a part. So we might have to do something like this where you do a get API cars give it and I'm going to change this name, card ID parts. This might be a call to get all parts that belong to given car. So we're gonna like probably, I don't know if we'll get into this week or next week, but we'll start doing association. So our URLs can get nested, another form of nesting. So where it's like, I need to give it the car ID. It's like, hey, this is just saying, hey, give me all the parts that belong to a given car. So we'll get into nested routes. But for now, we're going to stick with one model that are not associated with each other. So let's go do this with in Rails. We've kind of like drawn it out a little. We've seen it. Now let's go code it.
Should we just watch and kind of take notes?
Yeah, I would watch and take notes. Okay, so I've already created this. Cool. So I'm actually in a, let's actually just create a new Rails project just so we can go through these steps again. But I did push the foods model up to that links API, so we should be able to see it there. But let's just go through the steps of creating a Rails project. So to create a Rails project is pretty straightforward. Just do a Rails new. That's like a yarn create React app. We're just doing a Rails project. This like food demo. And then I just give it a couple flags to say, hey, I want to use PostgreSQL because there's a couple different database options to use. We're going to use PostgreSQL. And then I want this to only be an API project. So if you ever miss this API flag, you're going to have to start over because it's not going to work. Or you're going to get unexpected results. So that's just the command we run to create a new Rails app. And this is always going to be the same except for what you're calling the project. So I called this food demo. So now I should be able to cd into food demo. Something, because they don't automatically commit. If I do like a get status, there's a whole bunch of untracked stuff. So it's always a good idea just to do a get add, get commit. And just actually do want to talk about one more thing before we get into the code that I kind of forgot about. I just want to draw this out too, because I just want to talk about these two pieces that we see a lot. Let's share screen. Just kind of want to go over these words. There's the model and controller. This is part of a paradigm that is, you'll see referred to as MVC, where V is the view. I'm just going to cross this out because that becomes React. So Rails is what you call, it's an MVC framework. But when we did the -- API flag, we're kind of cutting out this view part of Rails because we want React to be our view. So React's handling this part of like our website. So now we just have the model and controller. So it's no longer MV. I mean, it still kind of is. It's like its own form of MVC, but we have these two words, model and controller. So the model, you can think of the model as like the nerd who knows how to like organize. Like, let's say we have foods. We have a food model. We're going to have a food model. So here's my, food nerd. It's no potato guy. Okay. This model knows how to interact with our database. Sweet. It knows how to like add foods to the database. It knows how to update foods. It knows how to create foods, all that stuff. It's also where we would put any like business logic. So like maybe this food nerd would know how to go find like, the most popular dish or like the most popular food or like what Sally wants to order for breakfast because he's got some AI stuff. Like, cool. So that's our model in the MVC. So, and your models are going to relate to the objects in the real world. So if we're like creating like an app, we might have like a food model, we might have a car model, we might have like a person model that know all about those things. You can think about the controller as like not like the server in like computer land, but like as a waitress or a waiter, like at a restaurant. So they're a waiter and they take requests. So our controller takes requests from our client. What does a server look like? I don't know what a server looks like. There's our server, yay. They take requests from the client that we're talking about. So from Chrome, let's just call our client Chrome for now. So a client's going to make an HTTP request, and that's really going to hit our controller in our Rails app. So a client says, hey, I'm doing a GET request to API foods. And that hits our controller. And remember in this one analogy too, we also had like the concept of a menu. Like that's our routes.rb file. So our routes.rb file kind of defines what things a client can order. So the routes.rb. So there's kind of like it's not really part of this like flow, but just know that the menu, the routes.rb is kind of the menu. Like the waitress or waiter would go to the person and be like, here's the routes.rb file, or here's your menu, here's what you can order. And sweet. So then Chrome's like, awesome, I want to do a get API foods. So that will eventually hit our controller. And then our controller goes, oh, sweet, I know how to handle that. I'm going to go to my like index method in my here that I have. And then I'm going to go talk to like the food model. And the food model is going to be like, sweet, I know how to go get all the foods from the database. Or if you want me to sort them or anything, I can do that too. And then I'll give them back to you, to the controller. And then the controller gives back our response.
So like the customer in this analogy would be like the Chrome user, like going onto the website.
Yeah, the customer is the word would be, I think the best word would be client.
Client, okay.
And like the rest of this, like if I drew like a line right here, this is your server. Like this whole thing is your server. Like the routes.rb, the controller, the model, that is
Yeah.
all living in the server.
I'm kind of curious.
Like your waiter, okay.
Why?
The waiters, so that's why the waiter's the
Okay.
controller. This
Okay,
whole
yeah.
thing is the server, or I should say backend,
But okay,
to be a little more clear on the terms.
that makes sense.
I'm sort of curious as to why there's both a model and a controller. Why wouldn't they be combined?
Because in coding, so this MVC is a paradigm. It is a way to think about, and it's a very common strategy to solve problems. And the reason why, because coding, engineers, software engineers, they like to break things up into tasks and kind of delegate work to different parts of the application. We could combine all of this into one thing, but that would become a shit show. So we have these, I mean, we could combine the model control, we could have the controller, we could have this generate the view all in one file, all in one method. We could just have one method that gets that request, that interacts with the database, that organizes it, that generates some HTML and gives it back. It's kind of like why we separate. If we have a function, we want a function to kind of do one thing. We don't want a function to do 20 things. So the model view controller paradigm is a way to break up the work. It's like you could go to a restaurant and you could have, you could have the person take the order and that person goes and cooks it and that person goes and presents it and then gives it back. But we don't do that. We have like a person who takes the order, and that because they're really good at customer service. They really know how to like handle that.
Okay.
And then they go then they go delegate the task to like the kitchen, who's very good at like prepping the food. So it's kind of like that.
I got that.
So it's just one, like, it's just a model that's popped up. It's very common in web development. It's not like you have to do MVC, but there's Rails is an MVC framework. I used like .NET. That's an MVC framework. There's a Python, I forget what the Python one is. I think it's Django. I think Django's an MVC framework. Now they're all going to have like their different varieties, just like a restaurant might have kind of a different way how they handle it. But kind of once you know the MVC controller, then you can kind of it's going to be once you've learned it once, then the next time it's going to be easier to learn. And we're skipping a step because Rails does have within the MVC, Rails does have a piece which we're skipping is like the controller would go get the data from the guy, and then the controller would go to like the view, which you could think of like as an artist who would make it all pretty, i.e. like convert that data into HTML. And then give that back to the controller. And then the controller would give back the HTML to the browser. So Rails is a full MVC app where there is this view part. But we did the API flag, which says, nope, we don't want to do that anymore. So it's no longer Rails' responsibility to make the food look pretty in this case. And by look pretty, I mean, that's like to make it look like HTML. So we don't get back HTML with as an API. We get back JSON. So I think maybe like as like a side lecture in like week 8, we might just see Rails as like a full-on, see what it looks like as a full-on MVC. But right now our Rails app is just model controller. And React becomes the view. And our client becomes like the view part. So cool. Lovely, lovely drawings. So let's go back. I'm going to share. Actually, let's take a break. I think this is a good time to take a break. And then we can get into the code. So let's go ahead. Let's do like a, let's just come back at 10:35.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I'm going to leave the meeting really quick just so I can convert the video and upload it. So I'll be right back. Going to make someone host.